The engine coughed black smoke into the morning air, and Daniel Cole knew, even before he opened the hood, that fixing this old tractor might be the only thing standing between his family and losing everything. He wiped the grease from his hands onto jeans that had already seen too many long nights, and he looked up at the woman standing a few feet away, arms crossed, watching him with quiet, unreadable eyes. She had introduced herself simply as Martha. No last name. No mention of what she did, where she lived, or why a woman who looked to be in her 60s was standing alone on a dirt road beside a rusted-out tractor, miles from the nearest house. All Daniel knew was that she needed help, and he needed the $40 she had offered him to fix it. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the idea that the smallest acts of decency can change a life forever, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to the channel, because this story is about to remind you why those things still matter. Daniel hadn't always been the kind of man who fixed tractors for strangers on back roads. 3 years ago, he had a steady job at a manufacturing plant 2 towns over, a modest house with a leaking roof he kept meaning to fix, and a wife named Sarah who filled that house with laughter even when money was tight. Then the diagnosis came. Stage 4, the doctor said, and within 8 months, Sarah was gone, leaving Daniel alone with their 6-year-old daughter, Lily, and a grief so heavy it felt like carrying the whole sky on his shoulders. The plant closed a year later. Just like that, the job he thought would carry him through was gone too. Since then, Daniel had been doing whatever work he could find, mowing lawns, fixing fences, patching roofs, repairing engines for anyone willing to pay him in cash. He and Lily lived in a small rented trailer on the edge of town, and some nights, after she fell asleep, Daniel sat outside on the porch steps and wondered how much longer he could keep the lights on, how much longer he could keep pretending everything was fine when Lily asked when they were going to have a real house again, with a yard big enough for a dog. That morning, he had been driving to a job that fell through when he spotted Martha standing beside her broken-down tractor at the edge of a sprawling field. She had flagged him down, almost desperate, saying she needed it running again before the day was out. Daniel didn't ask why. He just got to work, because $40 was $40, and Lily needed new shoes for school. The repair wasn't simple. The fuel line was cracked, the carburetor was clogged with years of neglect, and the battery terminals were corroded almost beyond saving. Daniel worked through the heat of the afternoon without complaint, methodically taking the old engine apart and rebuilding it piece by piece with the kind of patience that comes from a man who has learned that some things, engines, grief, life, can only be fixed slowly, one small step at a time. While he worked, Martha talked. At first it was small talk, questions about where he was from, how long he'd been doing this kind of work. But as the hours passed, something in her voice softened, and she began to ask about Lily, about Sarah, about the trailer they lived in and the dreams Daniel had quietly buried the day the doctors gave him that diagnosis for his wife. Daniel found himself talking more than he had in months, maybe years, to this stranger who listened without judgment and nodded like she understood exactly what it meant to lose something you couldn't get back. By the time the sun began to dip low and orange across the horizon, the tractor roared back to life, its engine humming steady and strong for the first time in what Martha said had been over a year. She smiled then, a real smile, the kind that reached all the way to her eyes, and she thanked him not just with words but with something in her expression that told Daniel she meant it deeply. She handed him $60 instead of the $40 they'd agreed on, and when he tried to hand back the extra $20, she simply closed his fingers around it with her weathered hands and told him that some kindness deserves to be repaid, even when the person offering it doesn't think they deserve anything at all. Daniel drove home that evening with something he hadn't felt in a long time, not quite happiness, but something close to it, a small warmth in his chest that reminded him he was still capable of being seen, of mattering to someone beyond the walls of his own struggling household. He didn't expect to see Martha again. But 3 days later, as he sat at the kitchen table sorting through unpaid bills while Lily colored quietly beside him, a knock came at the trailer door. It was Martha, standing there in the fading evening light, holding a folder of papers and wearing an expression Daniel couldn't quite place, something between nervousness and resolve. She asked if she could come in, and once seated at his small table, she finally told him the truth she had been carrying since the moment she watched him work on that tractor without once asking who she was or what she had. Martha wasn't just a farmer with one broken-down tractor. She owned nearly 4,000 acres of farmland spread across 3 counties, land that had been in her family for generations, land that produced some of the most valuable crops in the region. She had been driving out to check on a small, forgotten parcel that day, the one with the old tractor, dressed plainly and traveling without any of the assistants or managers who usually accompanied her, because sometimes she needed to remember what her land felt like without anyone treating her differently because of what she owned. She told Daniel that in all her years of managing that empire, she had met plenty of men who worked hard when they thought money or opportunity was watching, but she had rarely met someone who worked with that same integrity and care when he believed there was nothing more to gain than 40 honest dollars. She had watched him treat that old engine with the same seriousness he clearly brought to everything in his life, and somewhere in those long hours beside that field, she said, she had made a decision. Martha needed someone to manage the equipment and machinery across her farmland, someone honest, someone skilled, someone who wouldn't cut corners or take advantage of an aging woman who had grown tired of being surrounded by people who only saw dollar signs when they looked at her. She offered Daniel a full-time position, a real salary, benefits, and, because she had seen the exhaustion in his eyes and the crayon drawings taped to his refrigerator, a small house on the edge of her property that had sat empty since her own son moved away years ago, a house with a real yard, big enough, she mentioned almost as an afterthought, for a dog. Daniel sat frozen at his own kitchen table, unable to speak for a long moment, his eyes burning with tears he hadn't let himself cry in longer than he could remember. It wasn't just the job or the house. It was the disbelief that after everything, after Sarah, after the plant closing, after all those nights wondering if he was failing his daughter, a single afternoon of quiet, unglamorous work had led a stranger to hand him back a future he had almost stopped believing in. Lily, who had been listening from the doorway without either adult realizing, ran forward and hugged Martha around the waist, asking if this meant they could finally get that dog. Martha knelt down, laughing through tears of her own, and told her that yes, sweetheart, they absolutely could. In the months that followed, Daniel threw himself into the work with the same quiet dedication that had brought Martha to his door in the first place. He learned every corner of that farmland, earned the trust and respect of the workers who had been there for decades, and slowly, piece by piece, rebuilt not just tractors and machinery, but his own sense of purpose. Lily grew up running through fields that would have seemed impossible to imagine just a year before, and in the evenings, Daniel would sit on the porch of their new home, watching the sun set over land that had, in the strangest and most unexpected way, become a symbol of everything he thought he had lost forever. If this story touched your heart even a little, if it reminded you that kindness shown without expectation has a way of finding its way back to you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need a reminder that better days are still possible. Before we go, I want to ask you something. Comment the word grateful below if you believe that showing up with honesty and hard work, even when no one is watching, is worth more than any shortcut could ever be. Daniel Cole never set out to change his life that afternoon on a dusty back road. He was simply a father trying to earn enough for his daughter's shoes, treating a stranger's broken tractor with the same care he brought to everything else. But sometimes, the smallest acts of quiet integrity are the ones that open the biggest doors, and sometimes, the person you help without asking why is the very person who was waiting, all along, to help you find your way home.